Hi everyone, it's Lauren and I'm here today to talk to you about the favourite things that I have read in 2015, or my top books of 2015. And although I did a similar video in June talking about my favourite books of the year so far, I've had a complete re-evaluation, because I think sometimes the longer that you're away from something, you kind of fix in your mind what you actually felt about it, because it's so difficult sometimes the minute that you've read a book to give it a star rating or compare it to something else, because literature, like all art, is subjective and it's very difficult to try and pinpoint your favourites. So some of the books that I'm going to mention here I actually read in the first half of 2015 and they didn't make it onto my best of 2015 so far, and some of those books that were in that video aren't in this one. So I have 6 books to talk about that are my favourites. Before we get into those though, there needs to be some honourable mentions of books that I really enjoyed but I can't quite say that they were my favourites. The first one of those is A Spool of Blue Thread by Anne Tyler. I really enjoyed this at the time. This was quite a surprise for me because I thought it would be fairly lightweight. I'd never read any Anne Tyler before, and it just seemed like a typical family saga, not much going on, but her writing style really drew me in and I was just so invested in the characters. I found it so interesting, and at the time it probably was one of my favourites, but not really enough to feature it at the end of the year. The next honourable mention goes to Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi. This was a very magical book. It's very surreal, lots and lots of short stories and stories within stories and abstract things going on. I really enjoyed it, but although I did love it, I think at the end you could feel that it didn't quite tie up as neatly as I would have liked. So I loved reading it. I definitely want to read more by Helen Oyeyemi, but again, not quite there for me. And the last one is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, which again I read very early on in the year. Looking back at it now, I think I really enjoyed the reading experience and I didn't realise how much I enjoyed it, whereas the more I look back on it, I think that was a really lovely book, and it was quite slow and I just really enjoyed the experience and slowly getting to know these characters. So I just wanted to give it a little nod because I did really enjoy it and I don't think I appreciated it as much at the time as I do now in hindsight. So on to the top 6, my favourite books of the year. These are in no particular order, and the first one is Franny and Zooey by J.D. Salinger. The reason this book is in this list is because it was such a surprise for me, because I really did not enjoy The Catcher in the Rye and I wanted to try more Salinger, and Franny and Zooey I really enjoyed. So this is in the list not just because I enjoyed the book in itself, but because it's made me want to read the rest of Salinger's series that focuses on the Glass family. Franny and Zooey are the youngest 2 members of the Glass family, and you get this book in 2 sections, one about a day in Franny's life, one about a day in Zooey's life, and they do combine. And it's one of those typical snapshots of a day, but within that snapshot you get so much of their lives and their history and their relationship with their siblings and with themselves, and they're all very philosophical, having existential crises and that kind of thing. But I loved the way it was written, I was really taken in, and I really can't wait to read the other books in this series. The next one is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This probably is one of my favourite books that I've read all year, I think just because I read it so early on in the year and it was one of my first real kind of feminist texts that I'd read, or one that I'd read that I'd really enjoyed, and so it's a sentimental thing for me to include it in this list, as much as I really enjoyed it for itself. I'd not yet had the experience of reading something like this and just going through the sentences going, yes Virginia, yes, like I just agree with you, you're so right, and I really enjoyed reading it because she's so witty. And not being a great Woolf reader, if I'm honest, I have read Mrs. Dalloway, which I quite liked, but I haven't read a lot of her work. I was really surprised by this, and surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because I thought she'd be more difficult for some reason. A Room of One's Own is an essay which has been expanded from a speech that Virginia Woolf gave about women in fiction, and her basic premise is that in order for women to be able to write great fiction works of Dickens and what have you, what they need is a room of their own in which to write in, and the independence which allows them to do that. She covers a range of topics surrounding women in literature and women in the wider world, such as which types of art we deem to be important depending on whether they're about women or about men. So I would really suggest this as an introduction to feminist writing or feminist essay writing actually, as well as a really good introduction to Woolf herself, because she uses a much more natural conversational voice in this rather than perhaps what we're used to in some of her later work. The next book on this list is Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. This book takes the form of letters, which is written from an elderly priest to his young son. He knows that he is terminally ill, and he's writing these letters about his life and about faith for his son, so that his son can read them after he's gone. The prose in this book is absolutely beautiful, and the philosophical ponderings that our protagonist comes out with are just so interesting. I love what it does with faith and morals, and the fact that you have this man who's thinking about death quite a lot because he knows that he's about to die, and at the same time thinking about life and thinking about how beautiful life is and the life that his son is going to lead. It's just wonderful, and I enjoyed it so much. This book focuses a lot on faith, particularly on different interpretations of Christian faith. As someone who is not very religious themselves, I did not find it preachy in the slightest. I found it very interesting. I think it's very difficult to do that well and without it coming across too forceful, and I thought this book handled that brilliantly. The next book, oh my goodness, I loved this book so much, and that is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is the first Toni Morrison book I'd ever read. I'd heard a lot about her. I'd seen her books flying around on BookTube. I don't think she is someone who is studied at school in the UK as much as people like Maya Angelou, so I had not heard of her before hearing her books praised very highly or in this forum. The Bluest Eye is about the lives of black people in Middle America in the years following the Great Depression, so I suppose the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that sort of time period. It deals with really difficult topics such as poverty, child abuse and violence, racial violence, and one of the main themes in the book is the life of a little girl who just really wants to have blue eyes, and she believes that if she has blue eyes then she will be beautiful. I expected this book to be really hard-hitting. I expected it to cover some really important topics, and for me to come away feeling like I'd learnt something or feeling like it was an important book. I didn't expect the writing to be so beautiful. Toni Morrison uses excerpts from Dick and Jane books and sort of childhood nursery rhymes, fairy tale aspects, and it's just extraordinary, the language that she uses, and I enjoyed it so much. So I'm so pleased that I was introduced to Toni Morrison and that this was my introduction, so I'm really excited to read more of her work now. The next book I have on my list is We Need New Names by Novaalit Bulawayo. This book is based on the author's experiences growing up in Zimbabwe and then emigrating to the US when she was about a teenager. Again, the language is beautiful in this book, and the way it's structured is very interesting. We follow our protagonist, who is called Darling, and we just see her perspective. So we see her childhood games and we see historical events happening through her eyes. So not very much is explained because it's obvious to Darling, so why would you explain stuff? So at first it's a little bit difficult to get into and understand what the relationship is between everybody, but once you're in it, I just thought it was absolutely brilliant and really well written and really interesting as well. And finally, my sixth favourite read of this year was Girl Meets Boy by Ali Smith. Now I love Ali Smith anyway. I think she's a brilliant writer. I love the way she plays with language, the way she plays with genders, and you know, I was gonna love this book, wasn't I? I was going to love it, but I was not prepared for how much I was going to love it. I read it in about 2 hours, an hour and a half, something like that. I just couldn't put it down, and I just thought it was brilliant. This is part of the Canongate Myths series, which is modern authors retelling myths and legends, and Ali Smith in this book has retold the story of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and it's always so impressive how many things Ali Smith manages to get into a book about this long. I mean, this covers so many different topics about how we see ourselves in general, about love, about who we fall in love with, about gender obviously, and about modern society in general and kind of where we're going wrong. And I just, like, so many things. I just can't, it's so many things. It's so good. So those were my favourite reads of 2015. I actually had a really good year because I was trying to think of what my least favourite reads were earlier, and I actually could only think of one. I can even think of that many that I didn't really like. So it's good. It's hard to pick what your favourites are, but I think this six pretty much encompass what I enjoyed reading last year. So I would love to know what you enjoyed reading last year and what you're planning on reading into 2016, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! I read this series when I was a child, probably between the ages of about 12 and 14, and really enjoyed them, but I have never ever reread the series, and I knew that it was complex and layered as a series goes, so I was quite interested to read them again as an adult and see if I got anything different.